The Australian unemployment rate tumbles to 3.7%, raising questions about how long it will be before we see interest rate cuts. Migration levels hit a record high, and luxury giant Hermes is being sued for allegedly being too exclusive. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Friday, the 22nd of March, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you are speaking with, this is a great interview, you're speaking today with DJ McCready, who is the co-founder and CEO of Mountain Culture Beer Co.
Yes, now this is a group that began in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. They basically opened a little brewery, which has grown into one of the faster growing craft breweries in the country. We talk about that experience, but also what it's like to compete in a big market. And of course, brewing is a massive market. It's got a couple of giants in it. Great fella, DJ, really interesting chat. And he knows the beer market. I mean, he has quite a long history in terms of being a brewer. And it's just a really fascinating insight into that industry.
When you say that it started, I think, in the Blue Mountains, as you said, but it was in 2019. So it's only 5 years ago, but they've had something like 4,000% growth. It's quite extraordinary what they've achieved. So it's worth a listen just to hear what DJ says about all of that. Anyway, that's coming up after the show, Sean. We've got a lot to get through before that because the main story this morning is a biggie. The Australian unemployment rate fell to 3.7% last month. That is much lower than forecast, triggering fears that interest rates may have to remain higher for longer.
The labour force figures jump around plenty, but the 116,500 new jobs created last month was way above forecasts of about 40,000 new jobs. The January figure was also revised upwards by 15,000 jobs. It meant the unemployment rate fell from 4.1% to 3.7%. A bounce in employment was expected last month. The ABS had actually told us that there are a large number of people waiting to start work. But 78,000 full-time jobs, 38,000 part-time jobs created during the month. Amazing. Increase in participation rate to near record levels. Pretty surprising as well. It certainly took markets by surprise. Equity surged and the Aussie dollar pushed back above 66 US cents. Over the past 3 months, there's more than 20,000 new jobs being created each month. That is a healthy labour market. It's definitely performing better than expected, particularly given some of the forward indicators, things like job ads and that, actually suggest it should have slowed down by now.
So I suppose the big question then is, what does it mean for interest rates?
Well, it's fair to say there's no pressing need to cut interest rates anytime soon. At least that would be the perspective of the Reserve Bank on the back of yesterday's numbers. The problem with so many people holding jobs is that it pushes prices, including wages, higher, and that feeds into inflation. And that's what the Reserve Bank is trying to cull. The consensus view among economists yesterday was that there will still be a rate cut, but it will be late this year. In fact, some have pushed it beyond this year, and maybe there just won't be as many cuts over the next 12 months or so as they had previously forecast. Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers welcomed the announcement yesterday, saying the trifecta of falling unemployment, moderating inflation and real wages growth reflects the government's economic plan.
Just while we're talking about the jobs figures, I've got a very, very small bone to pick with you on this one, Sean. That you and I were discussing this via text message yesterday, and kind of when the news came through, I was like, okay, how does this all kind of work? How does this massive number come through? And you and I were texting back and forwards, and you said a lot of it is kind of statistical and the way it's all kind of calculated. I said, of course, it's from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Of course it's going to be statistical. And I thought I was being hilarious. And I got from you, the response was, yes. That's all I got.
I am sorry. Yeah.
That's all right.
You're probably right.
No, that's
sorry
fine.
about that.
No, that's fine. I mean, I don't hold on to things.
No.
How did local markets react?
Well, the employment news triggered a surge on the S&P ASX 200, which finished up more than 1% to 7,782 points yesterday. Financial stocks and consumer discretionary companies led the way, though it was broad-based buying, with close to 80% of the top 200 ending higher. National Australia Bank was the best of the big banks. They all did pretty well. Fortescue Metals was the standout of the big miners. The retailers also did well, as did some of the tech stocks. CSL was the worst performer of the large caps.
And what about international markets?
plenty happening. The US Federal Reserve has made it clear it wants to cut rates in the world's biggest economy 3 times this year. That sent Wall Street higher, with the broad-based S&P 500 closing at a new record above 5,200 points for the first time. The tech-heavy Nasdaq also jumped. Now, Fed boss Jerome Powell made clear that while inflation began this year higher than expected, policymakers still expect price pressures to cool. Rate hikes are now off the agenda, and with a little bit more good news on containing inflation, rate cuts are likely. The future trajectory of interest rates in the US is data dependent. Sounds like the Reserve Bank, doesn't it? Bond markets are now pricing in a near 70% chance of a rate cut in the US benchmark in June. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank, it's likely to cut borrowing costs in June as well, but it won't commit to further reductions. President Christine Lagarde, sounding very much like the Fed and the Reserve Bank. These guys all went to the same central bank school, I think. Christine Lagarde, she said, well, whether or not there's more rate cuts will be dependent on the data. Tell us something we didn't know. All this talk of lower interest rates has had an immediate effect on gold. The precious metal hit a record high of $2,224 an ounce. Now, investing in gold is an alternative to investing in cash, and given rates are falling, gold becomes more attractive relative to cash. Hence, that new record.
We're having a very, very busy end to the week, aren't we?
We are. My last day for a week or so, Michael. I don't know whether I've mentioned that to you off air, maybe once or twice.
You have mentioned it once or twice, and I unfortunately am here to remind you that you still have the weekend edition to go. So prepare for an absolute hammering.
Okay.
I think I'd like to take that back. Anyway, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Australia's net immigration intake hit a new record of 548,800 people in the 12 months to the end of last September, as the federal government ramps up integrity checks and visa conditions, particularly for foreign students.
The country's total population rose by 2.5% to nearly 27 million people, with a big jump due to that net overseas migration figure. During the 12 months, there was nearly 766,000 arrivals, about 217,000 departures. Experts say the rise in immigration levels may have peaked, though, with the number of foreign visa holders expected to fall as visas expire and stricter rules take effect. But still, that many new people in a country puts a lot of pressure on housing, and clearly the government wants to bring those migration levels down. From tomorrow, there are tougher English language requirements for students and graduate visas, and there'll be a new genuine student test, which will ask students to explain their choice of course and how it will benefit them. The government is trying to prevent misuse of the student visa scheme. Now, it will also increase the use of no further stay conditions on visitor visas, which blocks individuals from transferring to other visa categories in order to stay in the country longer. However you look at it, huge numbers of people coming in that 12 months to the end of September, and it is certainly one of the main reasons we have a housing crisis in this country.
Yeah, indeed. Now, in politics, Sean, Australia and the United Kingdom yesterday signed a treaty-level defence and security cooperation agreement.
Minister for Defence Richard Marles signed it with his UK counterpart Grant Shapps. Mr. Marles said it was a timely, practical agreement which contains a commitment to consult between the two countries when there's a situation that involves either nation's sovereignty or security. While on geopolitical issues, former Prime Minister Paul Keating said he had a pleasant conversation with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Of course, we've all been waiting for this one. We didn't hear from Wang Yi himself, but certainly Paul Keating thought it was pleasant. He said they focused on big picture discussions about the geostrategic balances and influences in the world. I'm sure they did.
Yeah, I imagine so. How about this? Being a director isn't a bad gig, with new figures showing that 16 ASX board members earn more than $1 million in annual board fees.
Topping the AFR Boss magazine ranking of well-remunerated directors is incoming Qantas chair John Mullen, who also chairs Treasury Wine Estates and Brambles. His base pay for being a director is $2.12 million. Next is the new chair of Westpac, Stephen Gregg, who also chairs Ampol. He gets about $1.93 million. Then comes Scott Perkins, chair of Woolies and Origin Energy, and a Brambles director. He takes home $1.82 million in company director fees. Not one of the $1 million plus directors is a woman, though females do now account for more than 30% of directors on ASX 200 companies, so improving, but not there yet.
Now, those figures are all pretty timely, Sean, given the chair of the corporate watchdog yesterday told directors that their job isn't easy, but if they are curious, then their businesses can thrive.
Joe Longo, the boss of the Australian Securities Investments Commission, is talking about all directors, not just the ASX 200. In fact, there are about 3 million companies in Australia, public and private, large and small, family businesses, startups, not-for-profits. They employ millions of Australians and they all need directors. Longo says being a director is tough work, but get it right and there are benefits. He says directors need to understand how their businesses make money. They need to understand the nuts and bolts of it. Being a director involves judgment calls, and those calls should be based on high-level principles, Longo says. It is about putting customers' interests first and acting with integrity, and history suggests if directors don't employ curiosity and judgment and don't apply themselves to questions in the business, then they're at risk of not understanding that business, and that is when they run into trouble.
Investment house Washington H. Soul Pattinson said net profit fell 33% for the 6 months to the end of January on lower coal prices and property valuations.
Soul Patts has its proverbial finger in many pies. It's now the 41st largest company on the ASX. We don't talk much about it. It first listed in 1903, making it one of Australia's oldest listed companies. It has its origins in pharmacies and over the decades shifted into building materials and resources, then media and telcos. Now it's a full-blown investment house. Something else curious about Soul Patts is that the current chair, Robert Milner, is the great-grandson of the founder, Louis Pattinson, and the fourth generation of the family to chair the company. In fact, Soul Patts has always had a family member in charge. Anyway, Soul Patts share price is up more than 20% over the past year. The key reasons for the drop in earnings last half were its stakes in New Hope and Brickworks. Brickworks also put out its half-year results yesterday. It swung to a loss on the back of an impairment charge in the value of its properties.
When you're researching a story like this, Sean, do you find yourself kind of disappearing down rabbit holes of history of companies? It's fascinating, isn't it?
Totally. So Soul Patts is one of those companies I've always known about, and there's also Soul Pattinson and Chemist in the downtown Sydney for many years ago, admittedly. And I was always a bit confused by Soul Patts, and then I knew it merged with a crowd called Milton Corp, which was a listed investment group in about 2021 or something or other. It then became a shareholder in a bunch of different companies. And I kind of knew that broadly. And then I just was reading their history yesterday. It's really fascinating. Just the fact that Robert Milner is the fourth generation to lead the company and, you know, a direct descendant of Louis Pattinson. Pretty cool, really.
It is cool.
Yeah.
Now, one more before we get to international news, Sean. Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen might change proposed vehicle emissions rules after the Biden administration announced it would give US car makers more time and production flexibility to meet standards that Labor says are a model for Australia.
Mr. Bowen yesterday reiterated a willingness to consider sensible suggestions, according to the Financial Review. He said the changes being made to the US standards are of interest to the government and are one of the things being considered before the policy is finalised. The local industry has called on the government to slow down the new emissions standards, which demand a manufacturer's fleet's total emissions are 60% lower by 2030. Now, in the US, the Biden administration said it will give car makers an extra 3 years to meet its emissions targets.
Okay, turning to overseas news now, and New Zealand has officially fallen into recession with economic growth in the 3 months to the end of December falling for a second successive quarter.
Now, remember the official cash rate in New Zealand is 5.5%, well above the rate here, and it has pushed the economy into recession again. In fact, it's New Zealand's second contraction in 18 months, with 4 of the past 5 quarters being negative. Weak consumer spending, thanks to the higher interest rates and cost of living crisis, is driving the slowdown. But other sectors like mining and manufacturing are also going backwards. New Zealand, like Australia, is experiencing a migration surge, so the per capita growth is even worse, averaging almost 1% over the past 5 quarters.
US authorities are taking on Apple, claiming it's breaking competition laws by blocking rivals from accessing hardware and software features of its iPhone.
The coming case will mark the third time that the Justice Department has sued Apple for antitrust violations in the past 14 years, but it's a first case accusing the iPhone maker of illegally maintaining its dominant position, according to a report on Bloomberg. It escalates the Biden administration's antitrust fights against most of the big US tech giants. The Justice Department is already suing Alphabet's Google for monopolization, while the Federal Trade Commission is pursuing antitrust cases against Meta and Amazon. The lawsuit comes after Apple was hit with a 1.8 billion euro fine this month for shutting out music streaming rivals from offering cheaper deals. Apple's appealing that particular penalty, saying that the regulators failed to uncover any credible evidence of consumer harm. It all just points to how interested regulators are now in these big tech companies.
Finally, Sean, this is pretty incredible, this story. Luxury brand Hermes International is being taken to court with allegations it is so exclusive that it is breaking US antitrust laws.
Yes, it's all about the Birkin tote bag. I'm sure you're familiar with the Birkin, the Birkin.
No, I have very little idea, Sean. Please educate me.
Well, it's a status symbol for very rich people, a bit like yourself. It costs up to $100,000 US, but Hermes will not sell the Birkin to just anybody, Michael. You need to buy thousands of dollars worth of other products just for the chance to get access to buy the leather totes, according to a lawsuit filed in California. The allegations say they are not available for purchase on the Hermes website or displayed in stores, and that's an unfair business practice, according to a report on Bloomberg. The suit accuses the luxury brand of structuring its compensation for sales associates in a way that reinforces what they describe as the unlawful practice of tying the purchase of Birkin bags to other products. The associates, according to the suit, do not earn commission on Birkin bags, but they do on other Hermes products that are less expensive. Great story. But really? Oh
my God, the lawyers are going to love this story.
Yeah, a bit ridiculous.
It feels like this is the kind of story that should appear in the weekend edition where we can discuss it in some detail.
I got it.
Okay, it's all yours.
Texted already.
Because I already planned what I'm going to do, and it is going to be glorious. I'm planning a triumphant weekend.
Enjoy that.
I'm also slightly overconfident. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. You're speaking with DJ McCready, founder of Mountain Culture Beer Company.
Just a great story about a small company found a niche, has grown incredibly fast over the past 5 years or so, taking on the big boys in that brewing sector. Well worth a listen.
Yeah, it is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 22nd of March, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.